Hello and welcome to the video. This video is all about CG, or balancing your model. Center of gravity is really important to how a model flies. Well, not just a model actually, any aircraft, real or scale, is going to fly better when the CG mark is in the correct place and it balances in the correct place. Now it's not just fixed wing that you have to think about with this. Even multirotors will have a particular place where they will fly better when they're balanced. But planes will typically have a centre of gravity. This is a nanotalon, and the centre of gravity mark, see if I can get it, there you go, just about see it, is normally there. It's within about the first third of the wing. And not having your centre of gravity spot on multirotors or fixed wing models, or even something like a flying wing, this is the Sonic model mini AR wing, even this little fella has a little CG mark. If you don't have it balancing on that little mark, then it won't fly well. So in this video, I want to talk about CG in a little bit more detail and talk about why it's important, how you can spot when your CG isn't right, and also what you can do to help make sure that it does actually end up on the little point that hopefully will be molded into the wing of your model. Now, usually the places where you are going to find out where the model should balance should be in the manual that comes with whatever model that you have. Now with something like a multirotor, it's a little bit easier. It's normally going to be the middle of the frame, and most manufacturers will put the flight controller on the CG point. So if you kind of hold it by the middle, it should be flat. And when you add the battery, you should add it so that it retains that kind of center of gravity. Sometimes the battery on it's easy to hold the other way around, but you see how this one, this is actually an armor tank quad, but you'll see how beautifully it balances and how well it's been designed, so that even with the antenna out the back, it has a lot of natural level, but when you put the battery on, it's going to work lovely. Now if you put an action camera on the front, then ideally you're going to want to put the battery a bit further back so that it retains that center of gravity. Now a quadcopter, because the flight controller will kind of take care of a lot of the issues if you don't get the center of gravity exactly in the middle. So it's a little bit less crucial, but still important to make sure that on a multirotor that it's working okay. I really like the models that have the CG actually molded in. Now this is a ZOHD Dart. This one is the one that I put the flight controller in. This one has the battery in already. And the way it should work is with the battery in, the CG marks are actually molded again in the bottom of this wing. If I put my fingertips on those CG marks and let go, you should see, it's a little bit tricky. It depends how big the tips of your fingers are, I guess. It should kind of balance on your fingertips. Should be able to do it like that. If you can, then you've probably got the CG in the right place. If you're trying to hold it and it's constantly wanting to tip over, it's nose heavy. If it constantly wants to tip backwards, then it's tail heavy. And we'll talk about the differences between those two in a minute. I really like models that have the center of gravity actually marked into the foam, but if they don't, what I do is I'll measure it based on what the position is in the manual and actually mark it underneath. Sometimes I'll put a little blob of foam safe glue and let that set up, so again I can find it quickly with my fingertip, and it's easier at the field to kind of pop my fingers under there and to check that it's actually balancing on those CG points. Now with weird planes like this with forward swept wings, the CG mark is actually about here. So you can see it's really far forward. So whereas normally in a wing you'd expect it to be here-ish, because of the way that the geometry is laid out on these wings, it's a lot further forward. Now you can with online tools work out where your centre of gravity needs to be, but I would always recommend first and foremost check your manual, and if you have models like these, check whether or not you've actually got the CG marks molded into the wing. If you have, that is going to be your guide. So let me talk a little bit about what good CG is. I've talked a little bit about nose heavy and tail heavy, and those are things that you'll hear about a lot in the hobby. Now, if you put the battery in, because the CG is designed to be there for when you have your battery in, And normally there'll be some movement available in your battery compartment to move the battery backwards and forwards to get it spot on. And with models like this, it's designed so that with the FPV camera in place, you've got that extra weight in the nose, so it's going to go and balance in the right spot. But if you try and balance it, and it is, where is it? There it is. If it's nose heavy, it constantly wants, when you're trying to balance it on your fingertips, it constantly rolls forward like that. That's called being nose heavy. Now, a plane will fly with a little bit of nose heavy. Now, 5mm in the center of gravity can make all the difference in the world. So if you are kind of 5mm forward of the center of gravity, as a rule of thumb, you'll probably find that you're slightly nose heavy. It'll fly okay. The control, particularly for the elevator, which is going to give you that pitch authority, is going to be a little bit dulled. It's more like you know, flying a dart than flying a plane. But it will fly. The control inputs will not respond as well. It will feel quite sluggish. That's your hint that you're probably a little bit nose heavy, your centre of gravity a little bit too far forward. If you have it spot on your CG marks, so when you try and balance the plane on your fingertips, it actually just sits like that, perfectly level, then you know your centre of gravity is spot on. You've got the right battery and you've got it in the right place. The plane is designed to fly in the best way like that. That is what you're aiming for. And you should find that the controls are nice and crisp. You get a really good responsive reaction from the model, but it is easy to control. And then let's talk about tail heavy. So if you do it and try and hold it on those and it's constantly rolling backwards and the tail is dropping, tail heavy is bad news. There's an old adage that a nose heavy plane will fly poorly, a tail heavy plane will fly once. And that's kind of letting you know that a tail heavy plane is a handful to fly. You'll find that there are very snappy movements, small corrections to the elevator will make it fly around. I had a plane a while ago. It was an EDF jet where unfortunately the manual from the vendor had the centre of gravity about 15mm away from where it needs to be, and it should have been 15mm more forward. So I set it up as per the manual, spectacularly tail heavy, and it took every ounce of my many years of skill to bring it down, and even then I damaged the nose. But it was like trying to fly a bucking bronco. It was horrific. So if you're ever not sure about where your central gravity needs to be with the marks, always aim to be slightly forward. I normally on a maiden will put the central gravity 2 or 3mm forward of where it reckons in the manual, just so it's slightly nose heavy, and that's just to make sure that if I'm going to err on the side of nose heavy rather than tail heavy, because that'll then allow me to get it back in one piece, and then I can have another flight within a slightly different position. You will note as you tend to fly that you'll spot the centre of gravity, you'll find where it flies the best for you. Make a note of that, put a little note, write it under the wing, potentially in Sharpie or something else. The other thing that I tend to do is I also tend to write inside the model which is the battery that needs to be in here, even the type of battery, and also its position. So let me kind of give you an idea. Here's one that hasn't got the battery in it. I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but it actually has written in there which is the battery that will give me the correct centre of gravity for this model. And that means that when I'm at the field, I'm not sure and I'm rushing to get back in the air, I can make sure that I put the battery in and it's going to be spot on. Now, in smaller wings like this, you don't have a ton of room that you could potentially move the battery around in. So it is important that you get a battery of the right weight. And good manuals will give you battery recommendations. And I also try and mention in my reviews the battery that I'm using, and to show it to give you an idea of which one is going to be the best one for you. Occasionally you'll get a situation where even when you put the battery in, you just can't get the weight forward enough. The mini Drac build that I did recently, you need a very big battery very far forward. It's designed for a really big battery for endurance and for speed flights. You need a lot of current to fly that thing. So you can't get away with a really small battery. But even if you put the biggest battery in that you've got as far forward as you've got, and it's still tail heavy, you can put a little bit of weight either in the very nose or wherever it needs to be on the model, so that the plane balances on those CG points. Now the centre of gravity again should also be on the midline. So if we're looking directly at this model, the centre of gravity should not only be where it is on the points, but actually directly in the middle of the body. So when you're putting flight controllers and things in, always try and position them so that that's going to be the case. You don't want the plane an awful lot heavier on one wing than the other. But if you're going to add a little bit of weight to get that point back where it needs to be, rather than put an awful lot of weight in here, I would probably do something like I'd get a little steel bolt or a screw or something like that and actually put it in the front. Now you can get strips of little pieces of lead, which is what a lot of modelers will use, and put a couple of very small pieces of lead, maybe just here under the nose, to get that centre of gravity spot on. Personally, I'm not a fan of adding extra weight into a model that's just dead weight like a piece of lead. I would rather have the extra weight as the battery, because that is also going to give me a longer flight time. So rather than use a 1300, use a 1500 3S battery and something like this, just to get that centre of gravity absolutely spot on. The last tip I'll give you, and one that I see a lot, is make sure that the battery is absolutely secure in your model. Because the battery is such an important part of the weight up front that offsets the weight everywhere else on the model to get the centre of gravity right, if that battery moves and it slides backwards to make the plane tail heavy in the middle of the flight, it will go from being a very relaxing, lovely flight into one that's fraught with lots of excitement. Make sure you are using Velcro, make sure you are using battery straps, make sure you're using good quality Velcro as well. If you're not sure, it doesn't take 2 minutes to just pop a battery strap in there just to make sure that nothing is going to move. Now in this one it's pretty tight, but in the nose of the ZOHD, I can show you that, it does actually have Velcro underneath, but I've also got a battery strap there as well to make sure that it doesn't move. So do the same thing if you are going to set your model up and you get it so that you know where the central gravity needs to be, you know what battery you need, you know where the battery needs to sit, and sometimes I will actually mark on the side where the back part of the battery needs to be. Make sure that it isn't going to move in flight and cause you an exciting afternoon trying to rescue the thing down from the sky as it's doing this, because it's suddenly become tail heavy as the battery slid back. So hopefully that's interesting and answers those kind of questions for you. Centre of gravity, whether we're talking about a wing or whether we're talking about a quadcopter, is something that you need to consider. And a lot of times people coming from quad land, multi-rotor land, and trying a wing for the first time underestimate how critical the centre of gravity is. So always make sure that your CG is spot on, and every time you go and fly, when you pop the battery in, double check as one of your pre-flight checks that the CG is in the right place, and you'll have a much nicer flight. Thank you for watching my video and watching right to the very end. If you want to find out what I'm currently working on, you can follow me on social media by searching for Painless360 in the usual places. If you'd like to become part of the inner circle, then you can become a Patreon. Details are in the description and you get lots of additional benefits. Check out the playlist section on the channel too. I organise all of my videos into playlists, and it's called something like Introduction to or for Beginners. All of the content is aimed so that you can start at the very beginning, and it teaches you that subject, starting with simple principles and moving up to teach you everything you need to know.